Hey everybody, Cindy here. Before I go into my story, I do want to kind of take the time to just share some thoughts about Texas and what's been going on there. There's so much that we see online, social media, and the news, and we've got it's a sick world. I'm sorry. There's some sick people with sick concepts, sick ideas, and they, sometimes you kind of go, just because you think something doesn't mean you should say it. But there's this special kind of hell for some of these people. But anyway, I don't want to dwell on that. What I do want to bring up is just thinking about all the people who have been sacrificing their personal lives, who have been going in and trying to find these children one way or another, and the families and the people, and there's some good stories, some very touching stories about people who've just gone out of their way to be superheroes, and even a couple of dogs. I always love those stories. The ones where the dogs are saving people. But anyway, I just want to remind you to just stay in prayer for the ones who are trying to help, bring these people back to their families. Most of them, their homes are gone, and it's horrible, and it's going to take a long time to recuperate, just like it's still taking a long time for North Carolina to recuperate in California, the parts of California that have the fires. It's going to take years, and it's going to take special people to go in and do their bit. We just have to stay in prayer, and I just appreciate the people who aren't necessarily from Texas or from whatever area that's having a tragedy. They leave their safety of their air-conditioned homes, with electricity and running water and things like that, and they put themselves in these situations where they're sacrificing their time and their lives to help. And I do appreciate these people. They're special. But the story I was wanting to share today, I want to start talking about when I left Morocco. We moved back to the States, moved to South Carolina. We have family in South Carolina, so it just made sense to move to Charleston. There was a Navy base at the time. There was a Navy base here. It's been closed since then. But my father was retiring. He still had a few years left in the military, so he had shore duty in Charleston. And so I went to a school that had a whole lot of different types of people. And so my first couple of years were kind of rough because I wasn't from here. I was pretty shy, and not very outgoing, and I was bullied. I mean, most of us dealt with bullying at one time or another, but I usually just try to stay under the radar and try to stay out of everybody's way. I never actually got beat up, but I was, had confrontations before, even on the bus, and the school bus, and got into some alterations with them, and it was precarious, and it is part of my story, but I survived. And when I talk to kids who are going through similar situations, I tell them they can get through it and just persevere, and the day's going to come where they're not going to be there to have to deal with these, again, bullies anymore. But on the school bus, there's this guy that was on the bus, and he always showed up in his ROTC uniform, and I thought he was kind of cute, and he was very nice, and he would sit by me, and we would chit chat, and he would talk about ROTC. And I was a freshman at the time, and he's like, "Well, you should join," and because I had told him about being a military brat, and that military was sort of my background, just being around a lot of military people, and it was just weird for me to be around all these civilians when I'm used to being in a school with other kids who were military brats. And so he encouraged me to go to the major of the RTC program and talk to him, because I was like, well, I could never join the military because of my vision. I would never be able to join. And he said, well, that shouldn't make a difference. So he said, well, talk to the major. So I went to the major and introduced myself and kind of told him, my story, being a military brat, but my story about being visually impaired and just dealing with all those issues. And he says, oh, that RTC, that's okay. You might not be able to join the military, but that doesn't make a difference with joining RTC. He told me all the different, the different options about being in RTC and how good it would be for me. And so I joined RTC, and I'm going to reach down for my picture here. So here's actually a picture of me with my brother when we're doing family portraits. So I'm in my cool uniform. I think there's glare on the picture. Put this up. My daddy made these photo albums, so they're very sturdy. And so that's me and Jeff when we were little, and I was probably 14 when I joined. And so I was in RTC, and I was doing pretty good, and I started making friends. I was still pretty shy, and I kind of kept to myself still, and there were some black guys. I'll just say that, and they asked me, they kind of hung around me, and they're like, "Are you a snob?" And that kind of like, well, I don't think so. It's well, do you not like black people? And I'm like, that's not an issue. It's like, what? I didn't understand. And so they were like trying to figure out why I kept to myself. And I said, well, I'm military brat. I moved around a lot, and it's just hard for me to get to know people. And they said, well, are you going to move again? And I'm like, probably not. My dad's retiring. So you're going to be here for a while. And I'm sitting here going, probably. And they says, well, you just need to get over it and make friends. And I'm like, okay. And they became some of my best friends, these particular guys, because they called me out. And I respected them for it. And so we became good buddies. And they joined the drill team, which was, we spin the rifles and throw the rifles at each other and catch the rifles and spin it again, and, marching and spinning rifles at the same time. And so I joined that. So I was actually on the drill team, and I would be in parades and things like that, and spinning rifles and going to competitions. And I wasn't great at it, but it was fun. And I was like very uncoordinated when I first started, but I was kind of learning, and some of them who were good at it, they would spend time with me, and because they got tired of listening to the sergeant yell at me. It's like every time something would mess up, you would hear them go, "Ward," kind of like Gomer Pyle, Pyle. But in this particular case, it was Ward. Dress right. And then I had to explain that I can't see out of my right eye. So one of the things you have to do when you're on a team, you have to dress to the person on your right. That means you line up. So if you ever watched a parade and you would see the military and they're all lined up, completely parallel to each other. And I had a hard time doing that. So it became a rule that everybody had to dress on me on the squad. So, which I thought was kind of sweet. They didn't have to do that, but they did that just to, to keep me in, because you lined up a height and things like that. So, until I became a captain, and then I got to tell everybody else what to do. So they had to dress on me, and so that was pretty cool. They didn't resent me for it. They just accepted it, and I became part of the gang. And, the good thing about being in ROTC was, I got picked on still, but there was this undertone of, you mess with me, you mess with mine. In other words, if you mess with Ward, you're messing with everybody else in ROTC. So I kind of felt protected. I kind of felt like I had my bodyguards, so to speak, and they did. They took good care of me, and they had my back, and I always appreciate that. And then my senior year, I really kind of came out of my shell, but some of that had to do with another episode that I had. So yeah, I'm on the drill team, and I'm getting to building up my rank. So I went from being an airman, and then went to leadership school and all that during the summer. And then so by the time I was a senior, I was a captain, and I was in charge of a division of materiel. That meant I was in charge of the uniforms and the the ranks and all the shoes and the jackets and all that stuff. I was in charge of all that. So that was a cool, and this was a really good way for me to sort of learn responsibilities for the real world. And so I thought that was really important, because this was a step into adulthood. But actually, when I turned 16, during the summer, here I am getting ready for my senior year, and I start feeling really bad. And my stomach was swelling, and I was just having other issues as well. And I started losing a lot of weight, and I was having, like I said, lots of issues. And so I was losing a lot of weight, and Mom took me to the Navy hospital a couple times, and saw regular doctors. And they always wanted to talk about my eyes, talk about my vision. I'm like, okay, you're not my eye doctor. I have an eye doctor. But they could never, and they would pretty much say it was because I was a girl, and I was just going through the change of, being a teenage girl. And they just left it like that. And I was getting sicker and sicker. And I got to the point where I just didn't want to go back to the doctor. And then Mom and Dad put a area on the floor out in the living room, because I was getting so sick all the time. They put an area so they keep a watch on me, and I just lost a bunch of weight. And one day I start feeling a little bit better, like, okay, I can get up and move around. And I got up, and I was doing something, and I was wearing like a halter top. And then Mom noticed that my stomach was just ballooned out. So she's like, okay, this is it. We're going to the emergency room. And so I'm like, okay. So I think I had a banana and a Hawaiian punch, something more like that, or Tahitian treat or something like that. And so we get in the car and we go. Didn't know that was going to be my last meal for a while. So we get to the hospital, we get to the emergency room, and the emergency room says, well, you need to go to, and they sent me to the other part of the hospital. So they sent me to the other part of the hospital that wasn't the emergency room. And Navy hospital is weird about stuff like that. So they sent me over there. And with the Navy Hospital, you don't have, usually you don't have one regular doctor you see who's ever on at that time, depending on what part of the hospital you need to see. Because I had an ophthalmologist, because I was a special case in that particular situation. But with everything else, whoever's on. So they send me over, and the nurse sees me when I get checked in, and she goes, "No, you're going to the emergency room." So she gets me a wheelchair, and she calls over there and she says, "You will be seeing this girl." And she had her suspicions that it was something to do with the spleen, but I didn't even know what a spleen was at the time. And so Mom's nervous, and Mom's pushing the wheelchair, and she's pushing me into walls, and she can't drive with tiddlywinks with the wheelchair. So she gets me back to the emergency room, and I believe there was a bus accident about the same time, so they're having to take care of emergencies, trauma, and all that stuff. So I'm laying down. They come and see me, and they're pushing on my stomach and listening to my stomach's making noise, and they're pushing on my stomach trying to figure out what's going on. They're like, "We don't know. So we're going to have to do x-rays and blah, 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 and do blood work." And my white count is just becoming more and more elevated at the time. So they check me in. Well, it takes about 4 hours, and they get me checked in. And I get a doctor who's on my case, and he doesn't know. At that time, they didn't have an ultrasound at the Navy Hospital, so they had to send me to MUSC for ultrasound. And so they get that, and then I had a liver spleen scan, which was so painful I don't remember it. They said I was awake the whole time, but I don't remember any of it. But they have to do all this weird thing where they put you on the bed, and then they have to kind of tilt the bed for the stuff to go through your body, and I'm not scientific enough to understand all that. But when the ultrasound came back, all they saw was this blob in my stomach. They couldn't see anything in particular, but they basically tell Mom and Dad, to make arrangements. This might be it. She's getting worse and worse. And, to be totally honest, I was in so much pain. I was praying for God to just take me, because I just hurt so bad. And in all honesty, that's how I felt. And I think I was 16 at the time, but I hurt. And I was ready. I was done. And then I had a dream, and the dream kind of helped me realize that, okay, no, it's not time. So I have the surgery. So it's an exploratory. They have no idea what they're looking at. And whenever they open me up, all this dark coagulated blood comes out. And so come to find out, what it was my spleen had burst. My spleen had a cyst in it, and the cyst was located at the area where the blood will. What the spleen does is basically it's like a filter for the blood gets to your heart. So because this is bad plumbing, the blood was backing up, and it was all coagulating, and so I have no idea when the spleen burst. That's probably when I start feeling better, temporarily. And from what we were told was they lost my heartbeat a couple times, and one of the doctors, he was just in there to be with me because he was invested. I had to have a bone marrow thing too. Now that was painful. Anybody if a doctor tells you that the bone marrow test isn't painful, they're lying, or they're trying to make you feel better, thinking that it's going to be okay, but it hurts. Just be ready. But it does help. It is important. If they tell you need to have the bone marrow test, it's important. So all these different tests, and I don't know why my computer's trying to tell me. And so I was in a lot of pain, you know. So they did the surgery. Family was coming to see me, and basically I think they were told, this might be the last time you see Cindy. So it was kind of like being at a wake where you're still awake. And so, like I said, I was kind of ready, but then I felt like God was not ready for me to go yet. So I accepted that. They did surgery, they stitched me up, and then they explained to me what had happened. And I'm like, okay. But the other thing that was kind of funny too is being 16 when you're military, technically you're kind of still an adult. Oh, you're kind of an adult. And there was one test that they were wanting to do, and they came to me, and mom was usually there all the time, but for some reason she hadn't gotten there yet, and the doctors came in, and I think it was like real early in the morning or something, and the doctor said there was a test that they wanted to do. And as I said, I was in so much pain, I couldn't make a decision. I mean, my hair hurt. So the doctor was like, well, you need to have this test, blah, blah, blah. And they gave me the forms to sign. And I'm sitting here going, I'm 16. And they're like, well, you're legal. 16 is legal. And I'm like, no, I want my mama. And they're like, but you're old enough so you can sign this paperwork and we can do the test. I'm like, no, I can't make a decision. I want my mommy. So they call her and they say, well, we need to do this test. And so can you come in? And she said, well, I'm on my way. But she was probably already on her way anyway. So she got there, and again, they ran more tests, and then because they were thinking that, well, first of all, they were trying to tell me I was pregnant, and I was like, no. And that I was having a miscarriage. And I'm like, no, that's not it. And I had to explain to them that I was not the next, Mary. Which most of them didn't get. But after we got past that part, then they started thinking that maybe I had Hodgkin disease or leukemia. And then I'm like, well, maybe we can go back to the pregnancy thing, because at least that will be gone pretty soon. But no, they were like, well, because of your white blood count, blah, blah, blah. And again, they really didn't know. So they go in, they see that the spleen had burst. They pump all that out, and apparently it was like 3 liters, something crazy like that. And so I am out for a few days, and then I start waking up, and then they tell me, they explain to me what's going on. Then I felt like I could tell I actually have a chipped tooth right now, but the stuff that they had to put in my for the breathing apparatus, they chipped one of my teeth. But I was like, okay, I guess I can deal with that. And so I just knew it was going to be a long recovery. And they were telling me that they didn't want me to go back to school for a few months. And this was my senior year. I was ready to graduate. Here I am, 16 years old, and I'm a senior in high school, turning 17 in October, and school hadn't started yet. And so they're telling me, we don't want you to go to school because you're still in a very precarious situation. But I make a deal with them, and I'm like, okay, what if I work it out with the school to not be around a bunch of kids at one time? So the school worked it out to where I would be able to sit by myself on the bus, which was awesome. So I could sit behind the bus driver on the bus by myself. Nobody was allowed to sit next to me because I had a lot of stitches. And then I would have to stay on the bus till everybody got off. Once the bell rang, then I got off the bus and I would go to my homeroom class. After everybody else was already there, then I would come in late. And that was what we did. we always waited for the bell to ring. Then I would go to my next class. When everybody else would be considered tardy, that's when I would show up. And then in some of the classes, I was allowed to leave early to go to the RTC building because they knew that I would be safe at the RTC building. So I was pampered for a few months, and then the doctors were happy about how I was recuperating. So, but they were like, okay, no excursion, nothing too strenuous, nothing that would pull the stitches. But I wanted to start spinning rifles again. So little by little, I started adding that to my rapport, and then I went for a follow-up, and the doctors are like, "Oh, you're recuperating so well. You're doing so good. Everything's healing. Everything's wonderful. We're very happy about how well you're doing, and actually you're healing faster than what we would have thought." I'm like, "Okay, good. That's just because I'm spinning rifles again." And they're like, "You're doing what?" I was like, "Yeah, we have a drill meet, and I want to be able to go to the competition, so I've been practicing spinning rifles again." They weren't happy about it, but they were like, "Well, you're doing okay, so just be careful." And I was, and I got to go to the competition, and we won. So that was my senior year, and I got to graduate 1980, and it was a one of those things where I really appreciate it because I almost didn't get to, in more ways than one. One, I almost didn't survive long enough to be a senior, and then I almost didn't get to go to school for a few months, and I would have been held back, and had to graduate during the summer. But the doctors and the teachers and my fellow students, my RTC students, everybody kind of watched out for me. And I was a senior, so I was a little, I wasn't harassed as much. It wasn't as threatening. The other students. Plus, once you're a senior, you kind of get past all that, I think. But anyway, it was a difficult year. It was, difficult 3 or 4 years. There was also some stuff going on with my family. My parents, stuff was going on with that. There was a lot of trauma in that situation. Some stories I won't share because it deals with other people. And, even though it's my story, it does involve other people. And I want to be cautious how I handle that. Because, too, I know scripturally speaking, we're supposed to forgive. But we don't always forget. And so some stuff weighs heavy on my heart. And some of y'all know what I'm talking about. But I'm supposed to, if I start reliving certain things in my life, I don't know if that shows that I've been actually forgiving of the certain situations and dealing with family. And I have special friends who know exactly what I'm talking about because they were there and they saw it. But it's hard, and I might talk about it later, but I'm just not in a place where I can really discuss that. But the funny thing is I have this dog. I'm big into the TikTok. In the TikTok world, I don't get into too much of the politics on TikTok. I watch dogs and cats and parrots and stuff like that because those are cute, and I just kind of want to get away from the real world for a little bit. So I watch all these different animal things, and there's this one beautiful golden retriever that actually lives in Greenville, South Carolina, and he has a big following. And I saw posted yesterday that he has splenectomy. He had gone to his visit because he hadn't been doing well, apparently, and they did some scans on a golden retriever, but this dog is making his family some money, so I could see why they're taking extra good care of him. So he had some tests, and he had a mass on his spleen, and they were able to do the surgery before it burst. And like I said, they were telling my parents to make arrangements for me, and so it's not something where everybody gets through. In fact, one of the things that they were asking me is, once I realized it was the spleen, they were asking if I had been in some kind of automobile accident, which I hadn't, because they hadn't done the autopsy on the spleen yet, to see why it did it, and they hadn't discovered the cyst yet. But they asked if I had been in an automobile accident, because a lot of people who are in auto accidents lose their spleens. And the other interesting thing is, later on I had some tests run, and I have extra spleens, but they don't know if they work, so the fact that I don't have a spleen is also an autoimmune issue, and then MS is an autoimmune issue, and then the medication that I'm on for the MS is also an autoimmune issue. So I've got all of these things that have been going on in my life, and then I decided to be a teacher and working with children who carry germs all the time. And then for a while I was also doing home health stuff, so I was around people who were sick all the time. So it's just interesting that that's the life that I chose to be involved in, is to be around a lot of people who have health issues. What are you gonna do? But anyway, so that was a lot of drama. And so if anybody wonders why I don't like drama, that's one of the reasons why I'm not big into the drama stuff. I've had enough drama in my life, and we're not even done with the story. This is when I'm 16, 17 years old. So having gotten to the part about when I lost my vision. So more challenges to come, I guess you could say. But anyway, so I'm kind of caught up to my part of my teenage life. There's some other stuff, like with Safari and stories about him. He was a good boy. I loved him. That my boxer that we had. But I just kind of wanted to follow up on some of the stories that I was sharing regarding being military and moving around, and we finally stayed in one place for a while. Bought a house in the Somerville area, and I was able to have 4 years in one school. Never had got to do that before, and it was like the life of a normal kid, I guess, except for the whole spleen thing. But I just I don't know, I just want to share a little bit about that update of my stories, and I hadn't really put together my thoughts, really. I'm just kind of hopped on and decided to share, and my dogs are getting in trouble over there chewing up something. But anyway, again, I want us to continue to pray for the people, not only in Texas, but also continue to pray for the people in North Carolina. Their lives will never be the same again. And California. What did I say? California, North Carolina, yeah. And there's going to be some weather coming, and so that's going to be a challenge for all of us, because I live in an area that's very well known. I mean, I might have a Hugo story, Hurricane Hugo story, come in the near future. But and we all have dealt with these types of situations where we had to face weather, whether it's tornadoes or hurricanes or whatever. But that's the thing that's so important whenever we're going through these tragedies, is if we understand what somebody's going through, then that makes us want to help them. And then when the time comes where we're going through it, somebody comes to us. When we were going through the stuff during Hurricane Hugo, people from Georgia, North Carolina were coming to help us. And then so it's only right that we're there to help people in North Carolina and Texas now that they're going through stuff, and California. So that's what we're supposed to do. That's part of being human, being humane, and caring and loving people, and not sitting there and being political and racial and that's gross. We're supposed to be there to help each other and to love on each other. We're not supposed to sit there and point our fingers and say, well, you're bad and God is condemning you because you're bad. And it's like, I'm not going to go there. I'm going to do what I can to help these people and live up to the challenge of being a Christian, show God's love through, the ministry that I am involved in. I personally can't go and do certain things, but the church that I go to, they'll send people up to help people in North Carolina to help rebuild, and yes, you can throw money at stuff, but sometimes just being there, that's special. A physical person that comes out of their place of comfort to go someplace else uncomfortable and be there to love on somebody. That's pretty cool. So be a blessing, be blessed, have a wonderful week. Know that you're loved and cherished, and just appreciate all that you have, and appreciate the people in your life, and don't forget that you have a chance of showing love to somebody by just being there for them when they're going through a hard time. And I appreciate y'all, and thanks for letting me share my stories again. And anytime you've got a little story that you can share with me, that'd be great, because I think that's important for me to get to know you all. I mean, I'm just throwing all my stories at you guys. Sometimes it'd be nice to just be able to hear a little bit about your stuff, and and if I can help you through a challenge that you're going through, then wonderful. I'm glad that I'm able to do that. So love you.